Fighting broke out in Tripoli between rival armed forces on Friday. Witnesses have described it as the heaviest clashes in the Libyan capital since the conflict between eastern and western factions paused a year ago. A resident of the Salah al-Din district in southern Tripoli says shooting began early hours of the morning with medium and light weapons. Reportedly, the fighting in Libya broke out between fighters backing the National Unity government and those who support the Presidential Council. It is a sign that there are still divisions as the country inches towards elections scheduled for December. The Presidential Council is in place until a new president is voted in and is supposed to be in command of the armed forces. December's vote is aimed at ending more than a decade of violence and chaos in the country, which has seen rival governments and a plethora of militia groups battling each other. Friday's exchange of fire is believed to have started when fighters backing the Presidential Council attempted to take control of a military camp south of Tripoli. Meanwhile, the United Nations support mission in Libya has expressed grave concern about the ongoing armed clashes, including the alleged use of indirect fire in Salah al-Din, a densely populated area in the capital, Tripoli. United Nations spokesperson Stefan Dujarric.
Our colleagues at the UN mission in Libya today have been expressing their grave concern about the ongoing armed clashes, including the alleged use of indirect fire in Salah al-Din, a densely populated area in the capital, Tripoli. The mission calls for the immediate cessation of hostilities and calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and remind all parties to this conflict of their obligations under international humanitarian law to support the protection of civilian infrastructure.
For some analysis, we're now joined by international law expert Dr. Innocent Badasu. Dr. Badasu, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good evening to your listeners as well.
Indeed, it's a pleasure having you join us this evening, Dr. Badasu. First of all, Saif Islam, the son of slain Muammar Gaddafi, is running for the Libyan presidency. I mean, Saif has been touted by analysts as someone who could unite all the factions in Libya, but the recent deadly unrest in Libya is proving otherwise, isn't it?
I think that the unrest is much expected when you look at the kinds of activities that have been happening over the period in Libya, and also in relation to the partners who have somehow expressed some kind of a vested interest by way of sponsoring or directly engaging in foreign military activities in Libya. It is not surprising that a few months down the line for elections to be held in December, we are where we are today, and we are seeing resurgence of violence and shootings amongst the various factions in Tripoli. And so the point is that the election obviously must be inclusive, so it's not surprising to see candidates that are emerging. We also need to understand that no single individual candidate who may win possibly the December elections can bring about reconciliation in Libya. Reconciliation would take a number of efforts from the international community and also from all the other parties who probably may have lost the election to be able to come to board and confer some kind of legitimacy on whoever has won. So it is not easy to project a candidate to be the one that is likely to bring about reconciliation and unity amongst the various factions in Libya, as we are seeing now.
And remember that last month, prosecutors issued an arrest warrant for Saif Islam Gaddafi for his connection to Russian mercenaries. How much of a stumbling block would that have on his presidential ambitions?
Well, this is not surprising. We have seen the ICC's intervention in Kenya. Subsequently, we noticed that those individuals who were accused of being part of crimes against humanity ended up forming a coalition, and that coalition produced an impressive political campaign, subsequently leading to an electoral victory in Kenya. So we need to really watch how the ICC's intervention in relation to the former president's son can kind of undermine his eligibility to contest or to undermine his electoral victory. From where I sit, my understanding is that sometimes some of these foreign interventions end up becoming a mobilizing factor. And so I am quite sure that the candidate has some of the best advisors and they will be able to utilize the ICC's intervention to their advantage. Where I see it, I think that it would be more of a mobilizing factor for the candidate.
Do we know what's behind the fighting then between those backing the National Unity Government and those supporting the Presidential Council?
Now, we need to go back. We have a ceasefire that was negotiated after several days of hard work that was subsequently signed in Geneva, and everybody thought that we have made significant progress in Libya. And the understanding is that some kind of a step towards peace was the way to go. But this particular violence should give us an indication that probably we have some local realities. We have breakdown in law, rule of law. We have breakdown in the judicial system that ultimately cannot shape the effort towards control and command of the various forces. Here we are, we have all kinds of armed groups operating in Libya, from the west to the east, and even within Tripoli, all manner of armed groups operating without a structured command and control. So in the absence of this structured command and control, it will be difficult to have some kind of stability in the country. What we do know and understand is that as you progress towards the elections, factions are organizing, mobilizing, new alliances are being formed. And so persons who may be unhappy would begin to undermine other parties who they think may be having control. The understanding is that some of the armed groups and forces do not want to come under a well-structured command, and that has necessitated the use of violence and shootings to be able to subdue them. I think that the way to go is to continue to press for some kind of a reconciliation and the ability amongst the parties to still demonstrate the courage they demonstrated in Geneva when they all signed on to the ceasefire agreement that was negotiated under the authority of the UN Security Council.
And do you see the elections going ahead in December?
From all indications, personally, I do not think that we have an enabling environment for free and fair election. As we speak now, you would have a situation where people would have to vote in fear and fear of violence. So the risks of violence at this time makes it quite difficult to stick to the deadline of December to have elections. I think that the violence that has come is an early warning signal, and that early warning signal must be treated with all the seriousness that it deserves. It would not be ideal to sweep these under the carpet and go ahead with elections in December. Secondly, beyond the violence, we have also noticed that the parliament that is based in the eastern parts has completely rejected a number of proposals that have been made by the prime minister. So in this case, you have a prime minister who is unable to have a spending power because some aspect of his budgets have been thrown out, have been rejected, if you like. And then also you needed a legal framework for you to be able to undertake this election come December. But here you are, even as at this point, we have not had a negotiated settlement around what should constitute the constitutional basis or the legal framework for elections to be conducted. And so with all of these complex political and legal challenges, it seems to me as though going ahead for an election in December would be a hard press, a situation that would not entirely be the best option available to the people of Libya and the rest of the international community.
Now, Dr. Badasu, what role then should the international community play in Libya this time around to ensure, lasting peace? Or should the process be dealt with internally with all the parties involved?
Now, for the international community, I think that their work has been clearly defined. We've seen several resolutions that were passed. The most recent was the UN Security Council resolution that was passed in 2020 in relation to Libya, and then also the ceasefire agreement. In the role of the international community has been clearly defined. First of all, they are supposed to supervise the exit of foreign forces, mercenaries, and all manner of armed groups disbandment. There was the talk of ensuring that there is reintegration after a period of disarmament and demobilization. These things have not been done. We know that there is an armed embargo on Libya, but increasingly countries violating the terms of these armed embargo, and they continue to supply arms to Libya. So the non-compliance, which Turkey has been named, and then also United Arab Emirates has been named as some of the countries that continue to violate these the terms of these embargoes. So you need the international community to come to the table in Libya with the clean hands, with an honest position to say, look, somehow we are also partially responsible for the problem in Libya, and therefore we need to do things the right way for lasting solutions to be restored in Libya.
All right, Dr. Innocent Badasu, international law expert, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Indeed, it's an absolute pleasure.